There comes a morning, ordinary on the surface, when you wake up and realize you no longer rehearse conversations in your head. No more late-night mental scripts of what you should have said. No more replaying her words, searching for hidden meaning. The noise is gone. And in its place, stillness. A deep, unshakable quiet that doesn't feel empty, but full. Full of presence, full of purpose, full of you. And in that moment you understand, healing isn't about forgetting. It's about no longer being haunted. You've stopped measuring your progress by milestones tied to her. No more counting days since the last text. No more analyzing mutual friends' posts. No more wondering if she's dating someone new, because your life is no longer orbiting her existence. It's moving forward on its own axis. And that independence, that's the quiet revolution. The one that doesn't make headlines but changes everything. Because real strength isn't in the dramatic exit. It's in what happens after. It's in the thousand small choices you make when no one is watching. Choosing the gym over the couch when sadness tries to pull you under. Choosing silence over texting when loneliness whispers her name. Choosing your future over your past, again and again, even when it hurts. These aren't heroic acts. They're daily declarations of self-worth. And over time, they build a man who can't be broken by rejection, because he's already chosen himself. And here's what most never realize. The deepest pain wasn't losing her. It was losing you in the process. It was watching yourself compromise your standards, mute your voice and shrink your dreams, all for a love that never asked for the same in return. But now, as the fog lifts, you begin to reclaim those pieces. The ambition you buried, the joy you suppressed, the boundaries you ignored. You start speaking up, not aggressively, not for attention, but with clarity. Because you've remembered what it feels like to honor your truth. This is where the real power lies, not in making her feel regret, but in becoming someone who no longer needs to. Regret is a temporary emotion. It fades. But the man you've become, that's permanent. You've rewired your psychology. You've shifted from scarcity to self-sufficiency, from need to wholeness. And that internal shift changes how you move through the world. You don't chase validation. You emit it. You don't seek love. You become someone love seeks. People notice, not because you're trying to be seen, because you can't hide a man who's at peace with himself. There's a magnetism in quiet confidence, in the way you carry yourself, in the way you listen without needing to impress, in the way you walk into a room not looking for approval but offering presence. That energy doesn't attract attention, it commands respect. And the right people, they feel it. They're drawn not to your past, but to your potential, not to your pain, but to your power. But the greatest proof of your transformation isn't in how others see you. It's in how you see life. You no longer view love as a rescue. You don't look for someone to complete you because you're already whole. And that changes everything. Now, if love comes, it's not a necessity. It's a bonus, a partnership, not a prison, a choice, not a crutch. And that freedom? That's the ultimate victory, because the man who walks away and keeps walking doesn't lose. He evolves. He trades desperation for dignity. He trades need for strength. He trades illusion for truth. And when he finally looks back, it's not with bitterness, it's with gratitude. Gratitude for the pain that woke him, for the loss that reshaped him, for the silence that taught him to hear himself again. So let her feel what she feels. Let her carry her realization, her sorrow, her longing. That's her journey. Yours was never about her. It was about becoming the kind of man who doesn't break when love fails, but rises. The kind who doesn't beg for a second chance, but becomes someone worth a lifetime. And when you stand in that truth, nothing, not her absence, not her regret, not even your past, can diminish the light you now carry. There's a moment, subtle, almost unnoticed, when you stop seeing yourself as someone who was left behind. You no longer carry the weight of being the one who got away like it's a title of sorrow. Instead, you begin to wear it as a badge of strength, because you didn't just walk away from her, you walked toward yourself. And in doing so, you did what most men only dream of. You chose long-term peace over short-term comfort. You picked your future over your feelings. And that decision, quiet, internal, uncelebrated, is the foundation of a life that cannot be shaken. You start to notice things you never did before. The way sunlight hits your room in the morning, the rhythm of your breath when you're not anxious, the sound of your own laughter, real, deep, unforced. These aren't small moments. They're proof. proof that you're alive again, that you've reclaimed your senses from the numbness of emotional exhaustion, that you're no longer just surviving, you're feeling. And feeling, even when it's hard, is a sign of life returning. Because love that drains you isn't love. It's attachment. It's familiarity. It's fear disguised as affection. And when you finally break free, not in anger but in clarity, you begin to understand the difference between being needed and being valued. She may have needed you, your patience, your loyalty, your consistency, but did she truly value you? Did she protect your peace? Did she honor your heart? Or did she take your strength for granted, mistaking your resilience for endless supply? Now, from a distance, the truth is undeniable. You weren't the problem. You were the solution she refused to appreciate. And that realization doesn't bring bitterness. It brings liberation. Because when you see clearly, you stop blaming yourself for someone else's inability to love well. You stop questioning your worth because of her limitations. You stop making her emotional availability the measure of your deservingness. And in that clarity, you rise. You begin to set standards not as walls, but as filters. You don't push people away. You simply stop inviting in what diminishes you. You speak with calm confidence, not to impress, but because you no longer need to prove anything. You listen deeply, not to earn affection, but because you're present. You show up, not to be needed, but because you choose to. And that shift, that's the emergence of true masculinity. Not dominance, not aggression, not control, but centered strength, quiet power, unshakable integrity. And here's what happens when you live from that place: life begins to reflect it back. Opportunities arise, not because you're trying to distract yourself, but because you're aligned. Relationships form, not out of loneliness, but out of genuine connection. Purpose becomes clear, not because you chased it, but because you cleared the noise. Because when you stop pouring energy into what's dead, you free up everything you need to build what's alive. You're not waiting for her to see what she lost. You're too busy living what you've gained. And what you've gained isn't just independence, it's self-trust, the unbreakable belief that you know what's best for you, that you can make hard decisions and survive them, that you can walk through fire and come out not burned, but forged, that you are not fragile, you are resilient. And resilience is the most attractive, most unstoppable force in the world. So if she does come back, if she reaches out, eyes full of regret, voice trembling with realization, she won't find a man waiting. She'll find one already moving forward, and that man won't reject her out of spite. He'll simply say no, not because he hates her, but because he loves himself too much to go backward. Because he knows now that peace is non-negotiable, that love should elevate, not exhaust, that respect must be given freely, not earned through suffering. And she asks, "Why won't you give me another chance?" The answer isn't in her, it's in him. In the quiet certainty of a man who's finally home with himself, there's a quiet power in knowing you won't go back. Not because you're holding a grudge, not because you're bitter or cold, but because you've seen the cost. You've felt the weight of living for someone else's approval. You've carried the exhaustion of loving harder than you were loved in return. And now, standing on the other side of that pain, you realize something profound. You are no longer willing to trade your inner peace for the illusion of connection. That decision, silent, unshaken, absolute, is where true strength lives. You don't need to announce it. You don't need to tell her. You don't need to block her or burn bridges. You simply know, and that knowing radiates through you. It's in the way you speak, calm, firm, without hesitation. It's in the way you move, deliberate, grounded, without urgency. It's in the way you love now, not desperately, not obsessively, but wisely. Because you've learned the most important lesson: love should never require self-betrayal. It should never demand that you silence your truth, bury your needs, or shrink your dreams just to stay close. And that's the transformation. You're no longer afraid of being alone. You've walked through that fear. You've sat in the silence. You faced the emptiness and realized it wasn't empty at all. It was full of you, the real you, the one who was buried under years of compromise, masked by the need to be needed. But now you're not hiding. You're not performing. You're not adjusting your voice, your opinions, your energy to fit into someone else's world. You're simply being who you are. And in that authenticity, you become magnetic. Because the world doesn't need more men who chase. It needs men who stand. Men who know their worth so deeply that they don't have to prove it. Men who set boundaries not as punishment, but as protection. Men who love fully, but only when love is returned in kind. That balance, strength with tenderness, confidence with compassion, is rare. And it cannot be faked. It can only be earned through the fire of self-confrontation, through the courage to walk away and choose yourself again and again. You start to attract a different kind of energy, not the chaos, not the games, not the emotional roller coaster, but stillness, depth, presence, the kind of connection that doesn't drain you but fuels you. And if she watches from a distance, sees the man you've become, feels the weight of what she lost, that's not your intention, but it's inevitable. Because when you stop trying to be seen, you become impossible to ignore. When you stop begging for love, you become someone love seeks. Not because you're playing a game. Because you've become someone worthy of real love, not desperate love, not conditional love, but mutual, deep, unwavering love. And if she reaches out, if she says she's changed, if she promises it'll be different this time, your answer isn't anger. It's peace. Calm, quiet, unshakable peace. Because you don't need to punish her. You don't need to make her suffer. You simply say, no, not out of revenge, but out of respect. Respect for the man you've become. Respect for the life you're building. Respect for the fact that you will never again allow someone to treat your loyalty as optional. You've learned that walking away isn't failure. It's the highest form of self-respect. It's the moment you say, my presence is a gift, and I will only give it to those who honor it. That's not pride, that's integrity. And integrity is the foundation of a life that cannot be broken. So let her feel what she feels. Let her carry her realization, her regret, her longing. That's her path. Yours is forward, always forward. Because the man who walks away and keeps walking doesn't lose love. He finds himself, and once found, he never gets lost again. There's a moment so quiet it could pass unnoticed, when you realize you no longer feel the pull. The urge to check her profile, to wonder what she's doing, to imagine her seeing your success and feeling regret. It's gone, not suppressed, not forced, simply absent. And in its place, a deep, unshakable calm, like the storm finally passed, not with a roar, but with silence. And in that silence, you meet yourself again. Not the version of you that begged for love, not the one who twisted himself into shapes to fit where he didn't belong, but the real one, the one who was always there, waiting beneath the need, the fear, the endless hoping. That calm isn't emptiness, it's fullness. It's the presence of a man who has made peace with his past, not by forgetting, but by understanding. He understands that she wasn't the reason he suffered. His attachment to her was, his need for her approval, his belief that her presence defined his worth. That was the real chain. And now, freed from it, he moves differently, lighter, clearer, with purpose that doesn't waver when emotions rise. Because here's the truth most men never face. Love without self-respect is just another form of suffering. And you've suffered enough. You've given enough. You've stayed long after your soul whispered leave. But now, you listen. And listening to yourself, that's where power begins. Not in loud declarations, not in revenge or grand exits, but in the daily choice to honor your inner voice, to trust it, to follow it, even when it leads you into loneliness, into uncertainty, into the unknown. And that trust, it compounds. Every time you choose peace over drama, growth over comfort, truth over illusion, you strengthen it. You prove to yourself that you are not ruled by emotion. You are guided by wisdom. And wisdom doesn't beg. It knows. It sees the long game. It understands that walking away isn't about her. It's about refusing to lose yourself in the name of love. You start living from a place of wholeness, not lack. And that changes everything. You don't chase relationships. You build a life so strong, so aligned that only those who match your energy can enter. You don't need to prove your value. You live it in your discipline, in your consistency, in the way you show up for yourself every single day. That consistency, more than any grand gesture, is what builds unbreakable self-worth. And when you operate from that place, something shifts in the world around you. People respond differently. Opportunities appear. New connections form, not because you're trying, but because you've become someone worth connecting with. Not because you're impressive, but because you're real, grounded, present. The kind of man who doesn't need validation, so he gives it freely. The kind who doesn't seek love, so it finds him. But the greatest victory isn't her regret. It's your freedom. It's waking up one day and realizing you don't care what she thinks anymore, not because you hate her, but because you love yourself too much to let her opinions still matter. That's the peak. That's the end of the struggle, not when she comes back, not when she apologizes, but when you no longer need either. because you've reclaimed your power, not over her, over your life. And that power doesn't come from control. It comes from release, from letting go of the need to be seen, to be chosen, to be validated by someone who couldn't see you clearly when you were right in front of her. So if she does come back, if she sees the man you've become and wants another chance, your answer isn't anger. It's clarity, quiet, firm, unshakable clarity. You don't say no to punish her. You say no to honor yourself, to protect the peace you fought so hard to build, to respect the journey that brought you here, because you know now love should never feel like a second chance at self-betrayal. It should feel like a mutual elevation. And if it doesn't, it's not love. It's just memory. And you're no longer living in the past. You're building a future so strong, so full of purpose, that looking back feels like looking at someone else's life. That man who stayed too long, who loved too hard, who lost himself in her, wasn't weak. He was just unaware. But now, awareness has awakened. And with it, an unbreakable truth. The greatest love story you'll ever live is the one between you and yourself. And that story? It's just beginning. There's a moment, so subtle it slips in unnoticed, when you realize you no longer measure your worth by what you've lost. You don't wake up thinking about her absence. You don't replay old memories like they hold answers. You don't wonder if she's happier now, or if someone else fills the space you once occupied. That obsession, that quiet ache, that endless loop of what if, it's gone. Not because you forced it away, not because you distracted yourself with work or gym or new faces, but because something deeper has shifted. You've stopped seeking validation from the past, and in its place you found something far more powerful, self-ownership. You are no longer a man defined by who walked away from him. You are the man who chose to stay with himself. That decision, made in silence, in solitude, in the darkest hours when no one was watching, that's the foundation of your strength. Because real power isn't in the dramatic exit. It's in the quiet choice to keep going, to wake up every day and say, without words, I am mine. To protect your energy like it's sacred, because it is. To guard your peace like it's the most valuable thing you own, because it is. And as that truth settles into your bones, you begin to live differently. Not with anger, not with pride, but with presence. You show up for your life the way you once showed up for her, but now it's for you. You train like your future depends on it, because it does. You work like your dreams are counting on you, because they are. You speak with calm, because you no longer need to prove anything. You listen deeply, because you're no longer waiting for approval. You move through the world not as someone trying to be seen, but as someone who has finally seen himself. That shift changes everything. Because when you stop chasing love, you become someone love chases. Not because you're trying to be impressive, but because you've become real. Not perfect, not polished, but authentic. The kind of man who doesn't play games because he's too busy building a life. The kind who doesn't need attention because he's already at peace. And that energy, it doesn't attract just anyone. It repels what's false and draws what's true. The right people feel it. They sense the depth. They see the strength behind the stillness. And they don't try to fix you because you're not broken. They simply rise to meet you. But the most profound change isn't in how others see you. It's in how you see life. You no longer view love as a rescue. You don't look for someone to fill a void, because the void is gone. You've filled it with purpose, with discipline, with self-respect. And now if love comes, it won't be a necessity, it'll be a celebration. A partnership between two whole people, not two halves clinging to each other for survival. And if she watches from afar, sees the man you've become, feels the weight of what she dismissed, let her. That's not your intention. But it's the natural law of value. We don't know what we have until it's gone. And when it leaves not in anger but in dignity, the loss cuts deeper. Not because you wanted to hurt her, but because truth has weight. And walking away with self-respect speaks louder than any argument ever could. Still, you don't live for that moment of her realization. You live for yours. For the mornings when you wake up and feel light. For the nights when you sleep deeply, not because you're exhausted, but because your mind is quiet. For the conversations where you speak your truth without fear. For the goals you're chasing not to prove anything, but because they matter to you. That's the real victory. Not her regret, not her return, not her apology, but your rebirth. The moment you stopped being a shadow of what you once were and stepped fully into who you're becoming. You didn't just walk away from a relationship. You walked into your life. And now, nothing, not her silence, not her words, not her presence or absence, can pull you back into the past. Because you've learned the deepest truth of all, the most powerful thing a man can do is choose himself. Again and again, without apology, without hesitation. And when he does, the world doesn't punish him. It rewards him, not always with what he expected, but with what he truly needs: growth, peace, power, and a life so real, so unshakable, that looking back feels like looking at a dream that's finally ended. And waking up fully, completely, finally has never felt so good. There's a quiet moment, no warning, no drama, when you realize you no longer carry the weight of her absence like a punishment. It doesn't define you. It doesn't haunt you. It doesn't shape your days. That ache, once so sharp it cut through your chest at random moments, has softened. Not because you've forgotten, not because it didn't matter, but because you've absorbed the lesson and released the pain. You've taken what it taught you, your worth, your boundaries, your strength, and left the suffering behind. And in that release you find something rare, freedom that doesn't depend on her reaction, freedom that stands on its own. You don't need her to admit she was wrong. You don't need her to feel the loneliness you felt. You don't need her to come back broken, begging for another chance, because your healing isn't tied to her regret. It's tied to your decision to stop betraying yourself for the illusion of connection. And that decision, made in silence and solitude, in the face of overwhelming emotion, is the most powerful act of self-love you've ever committed. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, but it was absolute. And from that moment on, your life began to change, not because she changed, but because you did. You start living from a place of quiet confidence, not arrogance, not superiority, but deep, unshakable knowing. You know your value, not because someone told you, not because you're getting attention now, but because you've proven it to yourself. You stayed when it would have been easier to beg. You walked when it would have been easier to stay. You chose peace when chaos called your name. And every one of those choices built a new foundation, one where your self-worth isn't shaken by silence, distance, or rejection. That foundation changes how you move through the world. You don't rush into new connections. You don't try to prove you've moved on. You simply live fully, deeply, authentically. And in that living, you become magnetic, not because you're trying to be seen, but because you're finally being you. The man who doesn't need validation. The man who sets boundaries without apology. The man who loves deeply, but only when love is returned with equal weight. That man doesn't attract fleeting attention. He attracts real connection, the kind that lasts, the kind that elevates. And if she sees you now, if she watches from afar, notices your calm, your strength, the way you carry yourself with a quiet fire, let her. Let her feel whatever she feels, regret, longing, surprise. It doesn't matter, because your power no longer comes from her reaction. It comes from your consistency, from the daily choice to show up for yourself, to train when no one's watching, to speak your truth even when it's uncomfortable, to protect your energy like it's the most valuable thing you own, because it is. You've learned that walking away isn't the end of love. It's the beginning of self-respect. And self-respect is the root of everything. Strong relationships, deep peace, unshakable confidence. Without it, you're just a man chasing approval. With it, you become someone who commands it without asking. So if she comes back, if she reaches out with tears in her eyes, voice trembling, saying she's changed, your answer isn't anger. It's clarity, calm, peace. You don't reject her to hurt her. You say no to honor yourself, to protect the life you've built, to respect the journey that brought you here, because you know now you are not a backup plan. You are not a second chance at someone else's growth. You are a first choice for yourself, and that choice is non-negotiable. The greatest victory isn't her realization, it's yours. The moment you stopped measuring your worth by her presence and started building a life so strong, so full, that her absence doesn't diminish you, that's the peak. That's the breakthrough. Not when she sees you, when you see you, and finally, completely, unconditionally, you approve. And from that point on, you don't look back. You don't wonder what if. You don't romanticize the past. You keep moving, building, becoming. Because the man who walks away and keeps walking doesn't lose love. He finds himself. And once found, he never gets lost again. There's a moment, soft, almost imperceptible, when you realize you no longer need closure, not from her, not from the past, not from the silence that once felt like rejection, because closure isn't something given, It's something claimed, and you've already taken it, not with words, not with a final conversation, but with every day you chose yourself. Every morning you got up and kept going. Every night you resisted the urge to text, to check, to wonder. In those quiet acts of self-respect, you closed the door. Not with a slam, not with anger, but with dignity. And that's the only kind of closure that lasts. You don't wake up thinking about her. You don't search for signs she's thinking of you. You don't analyze mutual friends or old photos. That obsession, the one that once consumed your mind like a fire, has burned out. Not because you forced it, but because you stopped feeding it. You redirected your energy. You invested in your growth. And in that investment, you discovered something powerful. The more you build your life, the less space there is for regret. You begin to live from a place of wholeness, not lack. And that changes everything. You don't enter relationships hoping someone will fix you. You come to them whole, ready to share, not to beg. That shift isn't just emotional, it's magnetic. People feel it. They sense the stability, the calm, the unshakable core of a man who knows his worth. And they don't try to change you. They rise to meet you. Because real connection doesn't happen between two broken people trying to survive. It happens between two whole people choosing to walk side by side. And if she sees you now, if she notices the way you carry yourself, the confidence in your voice, the peace in your eyes, let her feel what she feels. Let her realize too late what she had. That's not your goal. But it's the natural law of value. We don't appreciate something until it's gone. And when it leaves, not in anger, but in quiet strength, the loss cuts deeper. Not because you wanted to punish her, but because truth has weight, and walking away with self-respect speaks louder than any words ever could. But here's what most men never understand. The goal was never to make her miss you. The goal was to become someone you could respect, to rebuild your life not for her eyes but for your own, to look in the mirror and see a man who didn't break under pressure, who didn't betray himself for love, who didn't beg for a place where he wasn't wanted. That man, calm, centered, unshakable, is the victory. Not her regret, not her return. Him. And as you keep moving forward, you notice something subtle but profound. You're no longer afraid of being alone. You've made peace with solitude. You've learned that loneliness is not the absence of people. It's the absence of purpose. And you filled that void with meaning, with discipline, with vision. You train like your future depends on it because it does. You work like your dreams are counting on you because they are. You speak with clarity because you no longer need approval. You listen deeply because you're present, not waiting for love, not chasing validation, just being fully, completely, unapologetically. That presence changes everything. Because when you stop trying to be seen, you become impossible to ignore. When you stop seeking love, you become someone love seeks. Not because you're playing a game, but because you've become real, grounded, whole, the kind of man who doesn't need to prove anything because he's already proven it to himself. And if she comes back, if she reaches out with tears, with promises, with the hope of another chance, your answer isn't anger. It's peace, quiet, firm, unshakable. You don't say no to hurt her. You say no to honor yourself, to protect the life you've built, to respect the journey that brought you here. Because you know now, love should never feel like going backward. It should feel like moving forward together. And if it doesn't, it's not love, it's just memory. So keep walking, not away from her, toward yourself. Because the man who chooses himself every single day doesn't lose. He evolves. He becomes. And one day, when he's living the life he once only dreamed of, he won't look back with bitterness. He'll look back with gratitude for the pain that woke him, for the loss that reshaped him, for the silence that taught him to hear his own voice again. And in that moment, he'll know walking away wasn't the end. It was the beginning of everything. There's a quiet moment, no fanfare, no warning, when you realize you're no longer waiting for life to start. You don't need a relationship to feel complete. You don't need her return to validate your worth. You don't need closure, apology, or explanation, because you've already answered the only question that ever mattered. Who am I when no one is watching? And the answer isn't someone broken, bitter, or lost. It's someone strong, grounded, alive. The man who walked away not to punish, but to heal. Not to escape, but to evolve. And in that truth you find a peace so deep it silences every old wound. You no longer measure your progress by her reaction. You measure it by your consistency, by the mornings you rise without hesitation, by the goals you chase without needing applause, by the boundaries you hold without guilt. That consistency, day after day, choice after choice, is where real power is built. Not in grand gestures, not in dramatic comebacks, but in the quiet, relentless decision to show up for yourself, to protect your energy, to honor your word, even when it's hard, even when it hurts, even when the world doesn't notice. And that's the secret most never discover. Strength isn't loud. It doesn't shout. It doesn't need an audience. It lives in the stillness, in the man who walks away and keeps walking, in the one who chooses peace over chaos, growth over comfort, truth over illusion. That man doesn't need to prove anything. He simply is. And that presence, calm, centered, unshakable, becomes his signature. Not something he displays, something he emits. And the right people feel it. They're drawn not to your past, but to your potential. Not to your pain, but to your power. You begin to live from a place of self-trust, not blind confidence, not ego, but deep, earned belief in your own judgment. You know what you deserve, not because someone told you, because you've refused to accept less. You've walked away from attention that wasn't love, from affection that wasn't respect, from connection that wasn't mutual, and in doing so, you've proven to yourself that you are not desperate. You are disciplined, and discipline is the highest form of self-love. That discipline reshapes your life. You train not to impress, but to feel strong. You work not for approval, but for purpose. You speak not to be liked, but to be clear. You listen not to win, but to understand. And in that authenticity, you become rare. Not because you're perfect, but because you're real. The kind of man who doesn't play games because he's too busy building something real. The kind who doesn't need validation because he's already at peace with himself. And if she sees you now, if she notices the way you carry yourself, the fire behind your calm, the quiet confidence in your voice, let her. Let her feel the weight of what she dismissed. Let her realize in silence that she let go of something true. That's not your intention, but it's the natural law of value. We don't appreciate depth until we're drowning in shallowness. And when a man walks away not out of anger, but out of self-respect, the loss cuts deeper than any argument ever could. But you don't live for that moment. You live for yours, for the mornings when you wake up and feel light, for the nights when you sleep deeply. Not because you're exhausted, but because your mind is quiet, for the conversations where you speak your truth without fear, for the goals you're chasing not to prove anything, but because they matter to you. That's the real victory. Not her regret, not her return, but your rebirth. The moment you stop being a shadow of what you once were and stepped fully into who you're becoming. You didn't just walk away from a relationship. You walked into your life. And now nothing, not her silence, not her words, not her presence or absence, can pull you back into the past, because you've learned the deepest truth of all. The most powerful thing a man can do is choose himself. Again and again, without apology, without hesitation. And when he does, the world doesn't punish him. It rewards him, not always with what he expected, but with what he truly needs: growth, peace, power, and a life so real, so unshakable, that looking back feels like looking at a dream that's finally ended. And waking up fully, completely, finally has never felt so good. There comes a morning, ordinary on the surface, when you realize you no longer carry the weight of her absence like a burden. It doesn't haunt your thoughts. It doesn't shape your mood. It doesn't dictate your self-worth. That chapter, once so heavy it felt like it would define you forever, has quietly settled into the past. Not forgotten, not erased, but integrated. A lesson, not a loss. And in that integration, you find something rare. Peace that doesn't depend on her reaction, her return, or her regret. Peace that stands on its own, solid, unshakable, real. You've stopped asking, was I enough? Because you've already answered. Not with words, not with validation from others, but with action, with the simple, powerful fact that you walked away from what didn't honor you and kept walking. That decision, made in silence, in pain, in the face of loneliness, was the loudest declaration of your worth. You chose yourself, not once, not dramatically, but daily, in the quiet moments when no one was watching, when the urge to text came and you didn't, when the loneliness screamed and you stayed, when the old patterns tried to pull you back and you said no, without anger, without hesitation, without looking back. That consistency builds something unbreakable, self-trust, not the kind that comes from blind confidence, the kind that comes from proof, from knowing deep in your bones that you will not betray yourself for comfort, that you will not trade your peace for a temporary fix, that you are not someone who breaks under pressure, but someone who grows through it. And that growth It doesn't announce itself. It shows up in the way you carry yourself, in the way you speak, calm, firm, without need, in the way you love, not desperately, not obsessively, but wisely. Because you've learned that real love doesn't require self-sacrifice. It requires mutual respect, equal energy, shared effort. And now, you don't just talk about boundaries, you live them, not as walls, not as punishment, but as protection. You protect your time, your energy, your focus. Because you've realized your attention is your most valuable currency, and you no longer spend it on people, places, or memories that don't return the investment. You invest in your growth, in your health, in your purpose, in the life you're building, one that doesn't revolve around someone else's emotions, but around your own truth. That shift changes everything, because when you stop seeking love in the wrong places, you create space for it in the right ones. Not because you're trying, not because you're lonely, but because you've become someone love naturally gravitates toward. A man who is whole, who doesn't need to be fixed, who doesn't demand attention but commands respect through stillness. That energy, quiet, grounded, self-assured, is magnetic, and the right person won't need to chase it. They'll simply recognize it, feel it, rise to meet it. And if she sees you now, if she watches from afar, notices the calm in your eyes, the strength in your posture, the peace in your presence, let her. Let her feel whatever she feels, surprise, regret, longing. It doesn't matter, because your power no longer comes from her reaction. It comes from your alignment, from the daily choice to live in truth, to honor your word, to respect your journey. That's where real strength lives, not in making her miss you, but in becoming someone you could never walk away from again. You don't need her to admit she was wrong. You don't need her to apologize. You don't need her to come back broken, begging for another chance, because your healing isn't tied to her change. It's tied to yours. And you've already changed. You've evolved. You've become the man who doesn't beg for love, but becomes someone worthy of real love. Not desperate love, not conditional love, but deep, mutual, unshakable love. And if she returns, your answer isn't anger, it's clarity, calm, peace. You don't reject her to hurt her. You say no to honor yourself, to protect the life you've built, to respect the man you've become. Because you know now you are not a second chance at someone else's growth. You are a first choice for yourself. And that choice is non-negotiable. So keep moving, not away from her, toward yourself. Because the man who chooses himself every single day doesn't lose. He wins, not in comparison, not in revenge, but in truth, in peace, in power. And one day, when he's living the life he once only dreamed of, he won't look back with bitterness. He'll look back with gratitude for the pain that woke him, for the loss that shaped him, for the silence that taught him to hear his own voice again. And in that moment, he'll know walking away wasn't the end. It was the beginning of everything. There's a moment so quiet it slips in unnoticed when you realize you no longer compare your life to what could have been. You don't wonder about the path not taken. You don't replay the what-ifs like they hold answers. That mental loop, once so loud it drowned out your present, has faded. Not because you forced it away, not because you distracted yourself with noise, but because your life has become too real, too full, too alive to be haunted by ghosts. You've stopped living in the shadow of a relationship that drained you and stepped fully into the light of one that matters most, your relationship with yourself. And that relationship, it's stronger than ever. Not because everything is perfect, but because you've learned to show up, to keep your word to yourself, to do what you say you'll do, even when no one's watching. That consistency, training when you don't feel like it, working when no one applauds, staying silent when your heart begs to reach out, is where true integrity is built. And integrity is the foundation of a life that cannot be shaken. It doesn't come from being seen. It comes from being real, from doing the right thing, not for attention, but because it aligns with who you are becoming. You've stopped seeking love in places where you were tolerated. You no longer confuse attention for affection or presence for care. You know now that real love doesn't make you question your worth. It confirms it. It doesn't leave you drained. It fuels you. It doesn't require you to shrink. It gives you space to grow. And if it's not there, you don't beg. You don't negotiate. You don't lower your standards. You simply walk, not with anger, not with drama, but with quiet certainty. Because you've learned the most powerful truth, your presence is a gift, and gifts are meant to be cherished, not taken for granted. That understanding changes how you move through the world. You don't rush into new connections to fill a void. You don't use distraction to avoid loneliness. You sit with it. You learn from it. You let it teach you who you are when you're not trying to be someone else's version of lovable. And in that stillness, you discover depth, not the kind you perform, the kind you live, the kind that doesn't need to prove anything because it simply is. And that depth, it attracts differently. Not the ones who thrive on chaos, not the ones who need drama to feel alive, but the ones who are quiet, grounded, real, the ones who don't need to test you, who don't play games, who see your strength and don't fear it, but match it. Because real connection isn't about excitement, it's about alignment. It's two people who've done their work, who've faced their shadows, who've chosen themselves, and now choose each other, not out of need, but out of wholeness. And if she sees you now, if she notices the peace in your eyes, the confidence in your step, the way you no longer flinch at silence, let her. Let her feel the weight of what she dismissed. Let her realize in her quietest moments that she let go of something rare. That's not your intention, but it's the natural law of value. We don't appreciate something until it's gone. And when a man walks away, not in anger, but in self-respect, the loss cuts deeper than any argument ever could. But you don't live for that moment. You live for yours. For the mornings when you wake up and feel purpose. For the nights when you sleep without regret. For the goals you're building not to prove anything, but because they matter. Because you've learned the man who walks away and keeps walking doesn't lose love, he finds himself. And once found, he doesn't look back. Because the past isn't a place to return. It's a lesson to carry. And you've carried it. You've taken the pain, the rejection, the silence, and turned it into strength. Not overnight, not dramatically, but daily, in the choices no one saw, in the discipline no one praised, in the courage to keep going when everything in you wanted to break. And now, you stand, not on revenge, not on regret, but on truth, the truth that you are enough, that you always were, that you don't need her to see it. You just needed to. And now that you do, nothing, no person, no past, no failure, can pull you back into the life you left behind. You keep moving, not away from her, toward yourself, because the man who chooses himself every single day doesn't lose. He becomes. And one day, when he's living the life he once only dreamed of, he won't look back with bitterness. He'll look back with gratitude for the pain that woke him, for the loss that shaped him, for the silence that taught him to hear his own voice again. And in that moment, he'll know walking away wasn't the end. It was the beginning of everything.